My daughter got married and I found out when I saw the photos online. I sold her house and I always imagined my daughter's wedding day as a moment of union, joy, and giving back. For 35 years I dedicated myself completely to her. I cared, I sacrificed, I loved with everything I had. But on that day I didn't receive an invitation, a call, or even a message. I discovered everything through a photo on social media. That image changed my life forever. What seemed to be the end of my importance as a mother turned into the beginning of something unexpected. A journey of rediscovering myself. Between deep pain and difficult decisions, I discovered that there was still life beyond rejection. And more than that, there was dignity, strength, and hope waiting to bloom. Today, I can say that I was reborn from a place where many people get lost, the emotional abandonment by those we love most. I'm happy to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment on the city where you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The morning sun was coming through the window when I opened Facebook as I did every day. I was not prepared. The first image that appeared was Emily in a white dress, radiant, with a bouquet in her hands. Behind her, Christopher was smiling, surrounded by his parents, groomsmen, and everyone who mattered on that day. I felt my heart stop for a second, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. There was no message, no explanation. It was just a photo of a wedding I did not participate in. My body was trembling, but my eyes couldn't look away. The caption said, "Family complete, perfect day." I looked again. I looked one more time. I scanned every face, every detail. Vivian with her pearl necklace, Harold with the same smile as always. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. And it was at that moment, frozen in front of the screen, that I realized something inside me had broken. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. A dark, thick silence, as if my existence had been crossed out with a click. My trembling hand held the phone tightly. I tapped to see the details, like someone looking for a hidden explanation, proof that maybe I was mistaken. But there was no margin for error. My daughter had gotten married. My daughter, to whom I gave all my years, my health, my youth, had sealed a new life and left me out of it. Her face was peace, it was celebration. Mine invisible. And in that moment I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I sat down slowly with the phone still in my hand, as if holding it would stop everything from collapsing completely. The television was on, but I didn't hear anything. The world around me lost its sound. All that remained was that image, vivid, cruel, final. There was something cruel about seeing joy stamped on everyone, while inside me grief settled in. A grief for what I was, for what I imagined we would always be, for what she decided I was no longer. All of them smiling. All of them except me. As I stared at the screen, flashes of the past mixed with the present pain. I remembered the plans I made when Emily was still little. The dress I dreamed of sewing, the flowers I imagined helping to choose. I always imagined that day. I always thought I would be by her side. She was our daughter, our bond, our history. I stayed awake nights with fevers, I saved on everything so she could have everything. But in the end there was no space for me, not even as a memory. I remembered how I saved bridal magazines to show her when the time came. How I mentioned, even if discreetly, that I could make the dress. That I wanted to be a part of it. That I was always there. And even with her silences in the last few months I believed. Because mothers believe. Because I was still a mother. Until today. Until this photo. Now everything surrounding me was absence. A hollow echo in my chest. An empty room where hope once existed. With every detail remembered, reality became crueler. The silence that before seemed like just distance became proof. Proof that she had already erased me long before the ceremony. Not a phone call. Not a message with an apology. Not even an invitation, even if symbolic. Nothing. Just silence. A silence that now screamed inside me. A deaf but cutting scream going through me with force. Not a call, not an invitation, not a word. I allowed myself to scroll to the comments section. Maybe there was something. Maybe someone had noticed my absence. Maybe, no. Every message was a stab. Beautiful family. The most loved couple. Perfect day with everyone who matters. My eyes burned, but the tears seemed stuck. It was like watching my own funeral while alive, where no one missed me, where my presence never made a difference. As if the 35 years of dedication had evaporated. Erased. With every compliment, I felt more invisible. That wasn't just a ceremony. It was a sentence. The sentence that I was dispensable. That my history with her wasn't relevant enough to be there. That I somehow was an obstacle, a nuisance, a dissonant note in what they called a perfect day. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. The photo was still there, vivid. But I wasn't. I was erased. And no one noticed. The following dawn was one of insomnia. I sat on the sofa with an old blanket and a crumbled heart. I closed my eyes and was transported to other dawns. Those when I didn't sleep because Emily had a fever. I remembered the times I washed sheets at dawn in silence while she slept so she would wake up in a clean room. Of the sewing done by the kitchen light. Of the calluses on my hands. Of the bread I stopped eating so she could have yogurt in her lunchbox. My life was made of sacrifices. Of the wedding dress I never wore. Of the nursing course I abandoned. Of the car I never bought to pay for her college. Of every penny saved so she could go further. And I did it all willingly. Because it was for her. It was always for her. And now who was I? An inconvenient memory? An old portrait kept in a drawer? The name that wasn't even mentioned? I went back to the bedroom and opened the box of fabric scraps. There were the remnants of all the dresses I made for her. The 5-year-old birthday one. The first communion one. The prom one. Every fabric carried a smell, a memory, a hidden tear. I bowed over the box and cried, like a mother burying a dream. Because that's what she killed. The idea that I was essential in her life. The bond. The love. Now all that remained was a faded presence. A woman who gave everything, and didn't even deserve a pew in the church. Not a photograph. Nothing. The grief wasn't just about being forgotten. It was about having been irrelevant. As if 35 years of dedication could be deleted with a click. And they were. 35 years to be reduced to a digital void. The next morning, I walked slowly to the cemetery. I brought yellow flowers, the ones Harold liked. I sat on the bench in front of my husband's tombstone and stayed in silence. You would protect me from this, wouldn't you? I thought. I looked at the sky, searching for comfort that didn't come. I started speaking in a low voice, as I did in times of recent grief. But the words now had a different weight. The pain of losing you was inevitable. But being forgotten in life. That Harold, that killed me again. I told him everything with long pauses between sentences. The wedding. The photo. The caption. The emptiness. I cried inside. The image of Emily smiling without me invaded me. Like a knife reopening the wound. Harold didn't answer. But his silence welcomed me more than her neglect. It wasn't just absence. It was a choice. And what hurt me the most was knowing that this wasn't an accident. It was a conscious decision. And final. I touched the cold stone with my fingertips and whispered, "At least you didn't forget me." It was like talking to the only one who still recognized me as part of a family. 'Cause now not even that remained. At least you didn't forget me. I went back home still wrapped in pain. I tried to ignore my phone, but it vibrated insistently. A notification. A message. My heart raced when I saw her name. Emily. I opened it without breathing. Mom, everything was so rushed. The ceremony was small, informal. You know how it is. I hope you are well. Can we see each other soon? I felt the ground open beneath my feet. This was it. A cold justification. A soulless explanation. I looked at the words as if trying to extract something from them that would compensate for what was done. But there was nothing. Just a short, polite, distant text. No regret, no apology. A relief for her conscience, perhaps. For me, just another blow. Because deep down that was it. She thought a message erased the cut. That explaining was enough. But it wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. Too rushed to remember the woman who gave you life? I remember clearly the first dinner with the Whitakers. Their house was immaculate, without a frame out of place. The table looked like it came out of a magazine. Identical glasses, napkins folded like origami. But there was something there that made me uncomfortable. As if my presence had broken the aesthetic of the environment. Vivian received me with a smile that was too polite, and Harold just nodded. The warmth of a home did not exist there. I sat between Emily and Christopher trying to smile, trying to look like a part of it. But the conversation slipped into topics I didn't understand. International travel? investments, contemporary art exhibitions. Every word seemed like a reminder that I was from another world, a world they preferred to keep distant. Emily, when she spoke to me, used a soft tone, almost treating me like a child, as if she wanted to adapt me to the table. It was like being a guest in your own daughter's life. Eyes crossed but did not connect. It was as if everyone was playing a role, and I clearly hadn't been cast. I ate slowly, listening to contained laughter and formal compliments. No one asked me anything personal. No curiosity about who I was, what I thought. Just the protocol of politeness. Dessert arrived, and I already wanted to leave. I realized that world wasn't mine. And worse, my daughter wanted it to be hers. The dinner ended with a toast I didn't understand, and a light hug from Vivian, as if thanking me for leaving. In the car, Emily said, "Mom, you did well." And I smiled. But inside me something broke. It was the beginning of the distancing. The first clue that there was no real space for me in that new life. They smiled without looking. Over time, I started noticing Christopher's subtle gestures. Always nice, always gentle but without depth. When I asked about the engagement, he smiled. "We are looking for the best way to do everything." When I asked if they had decided on the date, he answered, "It's still early, Margaret." All with sweetness but without saying anything. It was like a dance, where every step was rehearsed to keep me away without seeming rude. Emily changed the subject with agility. If I spoke about her childhood, she laughed and said it was another phase. If I suggested something for the party, she thanked me but said they were still defining the format. I noticed her discomfort when I mentioned traditions, or my desire to help. And Christopher, always there, observing, punctuating with neutral phrases, like someone handling a piece in a chess game. It was all very kind and icy. Once I asked, somewhat awkwardly, if they already knew the location of the ceremony. Christopher replied with a smile, "Of course, Margaret, we will let you know." But no one let me know. No one called. That phrase echoed in my head for months, like a promise that never came. I started to realize that they wrapped me in a bubble of formalities to mask the distancing. And I foolishly accepted it. For fear of losing her completely, I got used to the silences, to the vague answers, to the averted glances. It was like walking on shards, trying not to bother anyone. But little by little I understood. It wasn't distraction. It was a plan. A project of exclusion, wrapped in politeness. "Of course, Margaret, we will let you know." As months went by, Emily started using terms that previously weren't part of our vocabulary. Appropriate environments, avoiding conflicts, privacy of the in-laws. Words that seemed more like codes to keep me away. When I mentioned the possibility of organizing a family lunch, she replied, "I think it's better not to mix environments." And I fell silent. I realized that for her I was something that needed to be contained, classified. These expressions became walls. They were beautiful excuses, sophisticated ways to exclude me without saying, "We don't want you here." Every term a brick. Every silence cement. I was being gently pushed out. Emily said it was out of respect, that she wanted to avoid embarrassment. But I never caused any. I never needed to be pruned. I was always discreet, contained, loving. And even so, she decided to silence me. One afternoon on the phone, Emily mentioned that the wedding might be intimate, only for those who are part of the new phase. That hurt more than any words spoken in anger, because there was a choice there. It wasn't about space, it was about belonging. And I clearly didn't belong anymore. She spoke carefully, but it was impossible not to notice the distance becoming an abyss. And all this said with a calm voice, a voice that no longer called me Mom. That was when I understood. She was preparing my exit from her life. With rehearsed words, with cautious gestures, with the politeness of the Whitakers. Excluding me without guilt so that everything seemed natural, so that no one would notice. But I noticed. Late perhaps, but I noticed. She was preparing me to disappear. The day after the message, I took a deep breath and dialed her number. My hands were sweating, my voice failed on the first attempts. But I needed to know. When she answered, her voice came animated, as if nothing had happened. I went straight to the point. "Emily, why wasn't I invited to your wedding?" The silence lasted only 2 seconds, but it was enough to freeze my chest. Then she replied softly, Mom, you would have been uncomfortable. I swallowed hard. How could she decide that for me? I asked if she even thought about consulting me, if she at least considered including me in some way. She sighed and said everything was very fast, that the in-laws preferred a discreet, intimate ceremony, that there was a lot of pressure, many difficult decisions. But nothing justified the absence of an invitation. Nothing explained the lack of consideration. And once again she said, Mom, it was better this way. For everyone. I tried to explain that I didn't need a party, nor the spotlight. I wanted to be there, that's all. A presence in the back pew. A hug after the I do. Anything. Emily remained silent for a few moments, then murmured, You know how things are with Christopher's family. They are discreet. Traditional. They didn't know how you would fit in. The words came out like razors. Me? Not fit in. That was it. She didn't want me to go. Because I didn't match. Because I embarrassed her. Or because it would be easier to erase than to integrate. And that was the real answer. Mom, you would have been uncomfortable. I continued listening, stunned, while she gave the carefully thought-out justifications. It was all very small. Only the closest ones. We didn't want tension. You understand, right? No, I didn't understand. But I remained silent. She said she preferred to avoid situations emotionally charged. That she wanted a light day. And for that, I would need to be absent. Emily, my daughter, the same one I rocked during colic and held hands with on the first day of school, was describing me as a burden. I wanted to scream, but there was no strength left. That wasn't just about the wedding. It was about being considered a nuisance. A threat to the ideal scenario she built. Emily had removed me from the narrative of her own life, and now asked me to understand, to accept. But inside me something was dying slowly, and perhaps it was necessary, so that something else could be born in me. A love that I would direct to myself for the first time. I took a deep breath and said, I understand. She seemed relieved. She didn't know that I understand wasn't agreement. It was a full stop. I hung up before she said more. And in that instant I knew my role in her life was over. I wasn't a priority anymore. But I wouldn't make her a priority in mine either. It was easier to pretend I didn't exist. After hanging up the phone, I stared at the emptiness for a while. The silence of the house seemed to scream. I got up slowly, took a piece of paper and wrote the date. It was the beginning of my turning point. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself as I hadn't done in a long time. I saw wrinkles, I saw tiredness, but I also saw a woman who could still write her story. From that day on, I would stop living as a background character in other people's plots. The anger turned into fuel. The pain turned into a border. If Emily wanted distance, she would have it. But now, on my terms. For the first time, I would choose myself. My desires, my future, my peace. Because living begging for a place at a table where they don't want me is no longer an option. Not anymore. Now it was about me. About rescuing what was left of me after the demolition. And rebuilding. Stone by stone. Pain by pain. I went back to the kitchen and made tea. I sat at the table calmly. Like someone who finally understands there is a way out. It wouldn't be easy. But it would be necessary. Emily excluded me from the most important moment of her life. And now, she would know the silence from the other side. Not for revenge but for survival. Now you will learn what it is not to be considered. Auntie Martha appeared without warning, as she used to do when she sensed a storm. She came in, looked around, and sat on the sofa like someone preparing for battle. I started to tell her, little by little, between pauses and sighs. She listened to me in silence, arms crossed, chin firm. When I finished, I expected some compassion. But she leaned forward, locked her eyes on mine and said, "Wake up, Margaret. What are you waiting for?" That she comes back regretful with flowers. I felt the impact of those words like a slap. "She is my daughter," I murmured, almost pleading. Martha nodded. "She was. But now she is the woman who excluded you from her wedding. Who lied to you. Who didn't think twice before erasing you from her own story." The words hurt more because they came from someone who had known me since I was a girl. "Do you think protecting her this way still makes you a mother?" I stayed silent. She continued, "Margaret, she is not your little girl anymore. You raised her. You gave everything. And look what she did with it." Her voice was hard but full of truth. I felt my body sink into the armchair, as if that weight was crushing me. I still tried to justify, but everything had already been said. I couldn't pretend I didn't see anymore. My daughter chose to leave me behind, and no one else would come to save me from this. The silence between us was heavier than any scream. Martha stood up and went to the kitchen to make coffee. I remained motionless, digesting every word. For the first time, someone had told me what I didn't want to hear, and I had no way to deny it. She is not your little girl anymore. Later, we sat at the table with the smell of coffee filling the air. Martha looked firmly at me and asked, "What if you lived for yourself for the first time?" The phrase disconcerted me. Me? Live for myself? I didn't even know where to start. You spent your whole life serving. You were a mother, a wife, a maid. But what about now? Are you going to keep begging for crumbs of consideration? I felt a lump in my throat, but I couldn't answer her. She continued, "Not being called mom is hard, but being called a fool is worse." I swallowed hard. "You are not a fool, Margaret, but you are behaving like one. That girl doesn't have you as a priority anymore, and you still act as if you were her servant. It's time to flip that switch." The words hit like a hammer, because they came from someone who wanted to see me standing, and not see me defeated. I looked around. The house was full of photos, memories, objects that told the story of a woman who lived for others. But what about now? What was left of me? I needed to make a decision. For the first time, I saw myself facing the idea that I could start over, that I could not be just someone's mother, that I could perhaps be just Margaret, the woman, the person. Martha held my hand tightly, her eyes watery. "You are still alive. And while you are, you can change everything." That phrase echoed in me for the rest of the afternoon. And that night, after she left, I opened the closet and looked at the back of the shelf where I kept the papers I was always afraid to face. Not being called mom is hard, but being called a fool is worse. I knelt on the floor and pulled out the brown leather folder, the same one I kept for decades. Inside were bank statements, documents, receipts, notes on expenses, hidden savings, everything I gathered in silence for years. That was mine. Every penny sweated for, saved with fear of need. I never used it because I thought that one day I would leave it to Emily. But now it was different. I stood looking at those papers like someone seeing weapons on a battlefield. I had resources. I had options. I just lacked courage. I stood up slowly, took the folder to the kitchen table, and began to organize the documents. For the first time, I saw a path outside the shadow of blind motherhood. Outside the guilt, outside the submission. There was a possible life. A life where I was the protagonist. Tears fell, but they weren't from pain. They were from liberation. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. For the first time, it would be mine. I felt my heart beat strongly, as it hadn't happened in a long time. And there, under the yellow light of the kitchen, I took the first step to exist again. Maybe I have a plan after all. 2 days later, Emily and Christopher showed up by surprise. They rang the doorbell as if nothing had happened. When I opened the door, I saw the plastic smile on his face and the careful expression on hers. "We're back from the honeymoon," she said, like someone announcing something to a distant neighbor. Christopher extended a shiny bag and said, "We brought a little something for you." A little something. As if that was enough. I invited them in. They sat on the sofa, commenting on the weather, the tours, the beaches. They spoke of restaurants and how Thailand exceeded expectations. Emily handed me a floral scarf with the tag still attached. Christopher, a miniature wooden elephant. "It's for good luck," he said, as if luck was what I lacked. I smiled. Automatically. Like someone who learns to smile by reflex. They asked vague questions about my health, commented something about the garden. It was surreal. As if the wedding had never happened. As if the exclusion was a delusion of mine. And there I was sitting, swallowing anger as if it were dust. Emily looked at me and asked, "Did you like the gifts?" "Yes, dear." "Are you going to wear the scarf?" I took a deep breath. Of course. My face said yes, but my soul screamed for justice. They didn't mention the wedding. Not a word. No apology. It was as if they expected me to thank them, to accept the elephant as a symbol of reconciliation. But there was no possible reconciliation when what broke was respect. When what was torn was dignity. Are you going to use it? Of course. As soon as they left, I went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed with the objects in my hands. The scarf was pretty but impersonal. The miniature elephant seemed like a generic airport souvenir. None of that had to do with me. Nothing brought truth. I put everything inside a cardboard box carefully. I added other memories of the same type. Empty cards, gifts that came after absences. I closed the box with tape and put it at the top of the closet, where I wouldn't see it every day. I didn't want to get rid of it, not yet. But I also didn't want to look. It was a ritual. A symbolic burial of what they pretended we were. Now I knew. Gifts are not proofs of love. They are often shortcuts to relieve guilt. But my pain would not be anesthetized by little souvenirs. And in that moment there, alone in the room, I realized that I was finally learning to set boundaries. That the Margaret who bowed was starting to straighten up. And there was still a long way to go, but the first step was already taken. Gifts don't buy respect. I entered the bank with my knees trembling a little, but with a firm heart. Michael Carter received me with a smile I already knew well, discreet, cordial, respectful. We sat in the glass-walled room at the back, as always. He opened my file carefully and asked me, "Ready to update the transactions, Mrs. Margaret?" I took a deep breath and nodded. Ready. For the first time, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my money. He adjusted the data on the screen, confirmed passwords, and asked if I would like to open a new account subdivision. I want everything to be in my name, with no indication of an immediate heir. He looked at me with surprise but didn't question. He just typed. Then he turned to me with that tone that mixes seriousness and friendship. "Everything is cleared. You can move everything however you want, Margaret." And I wanted to. For the first time I wanted to. While he finished the adjustments, I looked at the statement. Every value there represented a piece of me. Nights of sewing, hours as a housekeeper, savings made with sacrifice. That account was for years my secret gift for Emily. It was my final gesture of love, my way of taking care of her even after I was gone. But now, looking at those cold numbers, I understood this account was made by me. And it should be for me. Because no one else would take care of me as I needed. I closed my purse with a decisive snap. Michael offered me a coffee, but I declined. I had something more urgent to do. And that visit to the bank was just the first step. A symbolic step. A silent but powerful gesture. You can move everything however you want, Margaret. I went back home with a strange lightness, as if I were betraying an ancient pact. I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet in front of me. At the top I wrote, "Margaret's plan." It was almost ridiculous to write my own name after so many years where it always came after Emily's mother. But there I was. With a pen in hand with no one to opine, suggest, or correct. I listed dates, estimated values, possible places to live. But the most important thing was at the end of the sheet. Personal goals. I took a while to write something. The words didn't come easily. Peace. Silence. Dignity. I also wrote, walk every day in the sun. And finally, have a home that is mine, just mine. Seeing the filled sheet, I felt something bloom inside me. It was small but alive. Like a spark. I took a sip of water and reviewed every item. It wasn't a grandiose plan. But it was mine. Simple, direct, possible. For the first time, I was at the center of my own story. For the first time, all that I had gathered wouldn't be donated, inherited, or given as obvious. It would be used. By me. For me. And there was no guilt. There was relief. It was as if my soul said, finally. Folding that paper carefully, I felt that something inside me had changed. A gear turned. A path opened. And now there was no turning back. Now it will be for me. For the first time. The next day, I went to the stationery store and bought a new diary, navy blue. I noted the date of the potential move. I calculated how much I could use without compromising my future. I created categories: housing, health, leisure. I looked at every item like someone discovering a new language, the language of someone who lives for themselves. I found pleasure in planning, in imagining possibilities. It was like discovering a dormant muscle. I wrote small goals. Buy a new coffee maker, learn something new per month, go on a short trip. For the first time, I used the verb want without asking for permission. I didn't write if it works out, nor if there is time left, nor if she leaves me in peace. It was all direct, firm, clear. I had the right to exist beyond motherhood, beyond waiting, beyond pain. I put the diary in my purse as if guarding a treasure. I walked through the neighborhood streets with light steps, like someone starting to rehearse a new role. Margaret. Not the mother of. Just Margaret. Woman. Whole. I knew that confrontation, resistance, longing would still come. But now I had a starting point, and that was already everything. I started to exist as a priority. Dorothy called me 2 days later. She said she had remembered me when visiting a new place where her sister had moved. It's quiet, clean, sunny. I think you would like it. I accepted the invitation without thinking much. When we parked in front of the gate with golden letters saying Meadow Hills Community, I felt my heart beat differently. The place was simple but beautiful. Well-kept gardens, benches under the trees, a welcoming silence. We walked to the reception, where a young woman named Patricia welcomed us with a sincere smile. She shook my hand firmly and said, "Here you are, Margaret. Not anyone's mother." That caught me by surprise. It was the first time someone recognized me without linking me to someone else. I smiled, shy but deeply touched. It was as if, in that place, I had permission to start from scratch. As if my name finally belonged to me. Patricia guided us through bright corridors, full of paintings painted by the residents themselves. There was a small library, a sewing room, and herb garden. I couldn't disguise my astonishment. Everything there seemed to breathe lightness. There was no luxury, but there was care. And principally there was space. Space for me. Without demands, without pressure, without the past hanging around my neck. Dorothy noticed my enchantment and squeezed my arm, as if saying, "It's time." We went up to the second floor and stopped in front of a small apartment with a balcony. The sun came through the open windows, touching the light furniture delicately. There was a plant in the window, a blue sofa, a small desk. I entered slowly, like someone stepping into sacred territory. I looked around and felt something I hadn't felt in years. The desire to stay. "Here you are, Margaret, not so-and-so's mother." Patricia showed me the technical details, prices, available dates. Everything seemed simpler than I imagined. I sat on the sofa and closed my eyes for an instant. And in that brief instant I visualized my life there. Walking in the morning, having tea on the balcony, laughing with new people. It was possible. It was real. And the most impressive thing, it was my desire. For the first time, a place seemed made for me. Not out of obligation, not out of convenience. By choice. I took a deep breath and said, "I want this one." The two smiled, like someone watching a silent victory. Dorothy hugged me with tenderness. Patricia started filling out the pre-reservation form. While answering the questions, I felt that every word reaffirmed my existence. Name: Margaret Ellen Dawson. Age 67. Marital status: widow. But now above all alive. Willing to start over. Still afraid, yes. But with courage greater than fear. We left there with the sun touching my shoulders. On the way back, Dorothy looked at me and said, "You shined in there." I laughed with watery eyes. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself. Not for being a mother, but for being a woman. For having survived exclusion. And even so, choosing to start over. You can imagine a new life here. 2 days later, Patricia called me to confirm the spot. The move could be scheduled for 2 weeks from then. I wrote down the date with steady hands. Then I began to organize what to take, what to donate, what to leave behind. It was more than a cleanup, it was a transition ritual. Every object analyzed calmly. Every photo reviewed with eyes of someone who finally accepts moving on. I separated clothes that no longer matched the woman I was becoming. I threw away old letters, faded notes, accumulated guilt. I kept only what made sense. What represented truth, freedom, peace. I bought a new suitcase, orange. Vibrant, bold. Like a silent manifesto that I would no longer accept living erased. That suitcase would be the symbol of my crossing. That night, I sat on the living room sofa and looked at everything around. The house where Emily grew up, where Harold died, where so many parts of me were left behind. And I whispered to myself, "Thank you for everything. But the time has come." I wasn't just changing houses. I was changing lives. The lawyer's office was quiet, decorated with dark wood and the smell of old paper. I entered with firm steps, holding a folder with documents I kept for years. Dr. Marvin Thompson received me with kindness, without excessive formalities. We sat face to face, separated by a table, but united by a story I wanted to close. Doctor, I came to revise my will, but I want to include a condition for my daughter. He raised his eyes attentive. I explained that I didn't wish to cut Emily off completely, not out of revenge but out of justice. I said that half of my assets would be destined for social institutions that cared for elderly women and abandoned mothers. The other half, yes, could be Emily's, but not without her making a minimal movement of conscience. I want her to write me a letter, just one, explaining her choices, her absences, her silence. The lawyer seemed to hesitate for a moment. Do you want to demand a letter to validate the inheritance? No. I want a letter to validate the existence of the mother she chose to ignore. He started taking notes. I made a point of specifying. The letter should be handwritten, delivered personally or via a lawyer, and contain the motivations for what she did. I didn't accept vague words, nor empty excuses. Only the truth, even if it hurt. He agreed with a nod and continued drafting. When he finished, he looked at me seriously and asked, "And if she never writes, Margaret?" I took a deep breath. I knew that was the right question, the one that hurt, but also the one that liberated me. Because if Emily wasn't capable of even writing a letter, then she didn't deserve anything I built. I want to leave a condition for my daughter. I signed the document firmly. My hands didn't tremble. Every letter of my name was a brick in the construction of the woman I returned to be. I got up, thanked him, and went towards the door. Marvin accompanied me to the exit and wished me good luck. "More than luck, I wish for serenity," I replied. And at that moment I realized that the act of planning my death with consciousness was in fact a powerful way to affirm my life. On the way back, I passed a square and sat on a bench to watch the comings and goings of people. I thought about the institutions that would receive my contribution, of the silent help I would leave for women like me. I also thought about Emily, facing a requirement she couldn't ignore. Not if she wanted what I would leave her. It would be the first time in years she would have to look me in the eyes, even if in words. I took a copy of the clause out of my pocket and read in silence. The heir will only be entitled to the corresponding value upon a personal letter written to the mother, justifying her absence, her choices, and the exclusion of the mother from her wedding. I closed my eyes. It was fair. It was dignified. It was the minimum. She will have to write me a letter explaining her choices. I leaned my head on the bench and imagined the future. One in which maybe she would never write. In which the silence remained until the end. And surprisingly, that didn't scare me as before. Because now I had done my part. Given my last chance. Extended my hand clearly and firmly. If she refused, the pain would be hers, not mine. I would leave in peace, knowing I didn't annul myself until the end. I remained there for a few more minutes, at peace with my decision. For the first time, my legacy wasn't just material. It was moral. It was a summons to truth, a demand for humanity. And if she couldn't fulfill it, then she wouldn't have anything else to take from me. Because I would have already taken with me what remained of self-love. Then she doesn't need my share. And I stay in peace. On that gray morning, Emily parked the car in front of the house where she grew up. She had the keys in her hand and a plan in her head. Ask for forgiveness lightly, deliver a souvenir from the trip, pretend everything could be solved with a hug. She opened the gate, crossed the yard, and turned the doorknob. But upon pushing the door, she faced emptiness. The living room echoed. The walls were bare. The house deserted. She entered slowly, looking around like someone searching for something she already knows she won't find. She called my name, but only silence answered. She walked to the kitchen, nothing. Passed by the bedroom, empty. The closet was clean. The pictures had disappeared from the walls. It was as if I had never lived there. "Where is she?" she whispered to herself, phone already in her hands. She dialed my number with trembling fingers. She waited, and I answered. My voice came calm, almost sweet. "Hi, Emily." She didn't know what to say immediately. She took a deep breath and tried to sound natural. "Mom, where are you?" "The house is empty." I stayed silent for an instant, then said, "You came too late." There was no anger in my voice, just observation. She stammered something about missing me, about time, about wanting to talk. I listened to everything with serenity. That serenity that comes when the soul has already made peace with its own pain. She tried to tell me that I had disappeared from her life. That my disappearance was a scare. That she was worried. And I, with all the firmness left in me, replied, "No. I was pushed out." Because that's what she did. She pushed me away with care, with chosen words, with calculated exclusions. She just didn't expect that one day I would walk away of my own free will. And that, looking back, I wouldn't feel the need to return. "You disappeared from my life," she cried. Maybe out of regret. Maybe out of surprise. Maybe just for not having control of the situation anymore. And I, on the other side of the line, kept firm. Not like a resentful mother, but like a woman who chose to live. She asked where I was, if she could see me. She said she wanted to talk, clarify things. And I took a deep breath before answering. "Not now. Not out of pride, but out of respect. For me. You were always a priority to me, Emily. But now I learned that I can't be for someone who doesn't consider me." Her silence was the same I heard on the wedding day. But this time it didn't hurt me. It liberated me. Because I had already chosen my place in the world. And it wasn't a forgotten corner in my daughter's life anymore. It was the center of my own existence. I hung up without drama. Just with firmness. And went back to organizing my new shelf at Meadow Hills. Books, portraits, plants. Everything new, everything light. For the first time I breathed deeply without fear. Because the worst had already passed. And I survived. Whole. Free. And with room to bloom. And now you won't be my priority either. Now I am curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you gone through something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I am leaving on the end screen another story that you will also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. Until the next video.